Hi. I'm going to explain in this brief video how to answer a question with an essay structure for the following essay question. Outline and assess Weberian explanations of social inequality in the contemporary UK. 40 marks. This is for unit G674, Social Inequality and Difference exam, which is the last exam in the A2 course. So, in the first part of the essay, I'd do the following. And if you refer to your notes on the handout, you can see that I'm going to go through each stage one at a time. Firstly, we define social inequality as the unequal distribution of life chances in terms of opportunities, social mobility, education, work, health, politics, power, resources, etc. Weberianism can be defined broadly as a critical theory because it emphasizes the competition between groups and the problematic way in which society involves and social relationships involve exploitation. And it's a conflict theory because it emphasizes the competition between groups. Weberian theories have similarities with Marxism, particularly neo-Marxism, and may be critically discussed by feminists, postmodernists, and most strongly criticised by New Right and functionalists. One of the first points I'd make is that the Weberian theorists are supported by other critical thinkers because they advocate what has been described as the social advantages and disadvantages thesis. Social advantages and disadvantages thesis emphasises some groups are advantaged or benefit because of their social background and the social structure of society. For example, in terms of their class, age, gender and ethnicity, white middle-class males are able to benefit from privilege, power, more freedoms and more opportunities. In contrast, the idea of disadvantage suggests that some groups are excluded or unable to benefit from resources or opportunities in society. This could be a result of prejudice, discrimination. So, for example, Pakistani and Bangladeshi and African Caribbean males compared to other groups may suffer inequalities, but also this may be a result of barriers in terms of class prejudice, ageism for young males from those groups, and racism. Okay, so in looking at different areas of social life, firstly looking at work, Weberian theorists such as Goldthorpe have applied the concepts of market status and work status to explain the occupations in the labour market and how they're divided based on one's skills and their value in the labour market. The National Statistical Socio-Economic Classification Index divides social status hierarchy into 8 divisions. This was developed by Goldthorpe based on the Weberian perspective that occupational status and income are important in explaining social class position. The higher education data supports the idea that there are still divisions in the class system. This can be linked to education. 11% of Oxbridge undergraduates come from the class or occupational groupings of 4 to 7 in the NSSEC system. Although Weber emphasized market position as being important, he has been described as the ghost of Marx because he emphasizes ownership and property. However, some Weberian thinkers like Goldthorpe have argued that the upper class has lost power, and so rather than polarization between class groups as Marx suggested would happen, Weber emphasized fragmentation of the class system. This is important because Weber's explanation of market position helps explain why the class system can be seen as more fragmented, where the class boundaries are less clearly divided between the upper and lower class because of the growth of the middle class, because of changes to the occupations and professions, the opening up of professional jobs in education and health, social work. These new professions can be seen as having less status in the labour market compared to the old professions of law and medicine. The working class can be seen to have undergone a process of embourgeoisement, according to Goldthorpe, where the working class experienced social mobility upwards into the middle class. This suggests that there's further fragmentation where the class system is more complex and broken up. It's less easy to identify which class someone fits into. Weber argued that society would see a process of rationalization, where there'd be increasing efficiency in the production system. This means that there'd be more middle class, non-manual labour jobs, because people are needed to organise production to make it more efficient, to make it work better. And so they'll need to use mental powers rather than physical powers to do this. This would lead to the development of the middle class and its growth. This occupational analysis is criticised by Marxists. So Weberians are seen as overplaying occupational status as part of class status, and overplaying fragmentation in the class system. And Marxists argue they underplay and ignore the polarisation of the rich and poor, where there's actually a hardening of class inequalities rather than a blurring or fragmentation. This is supported by Marxist thinkers like Westergaard and Ressler. Weber also described processes of social closure. So although he says that there will be social mobility, where people will move up into the middle class, people may move around in the class system, and Goldthorpe and others have looked at how the working class have achieved upward social mobility. Weber also described social closure, where the elite and professional occupational groups, like the civil service in the UK, are able to maintain their power and status by restricting access to a membership of their group. This means that other groups are not able to access the superior positions within the professions and the occupations that are non-manual occupations. The process of social closure therefore involves groups maintaining their power and closing out other groups. This can be supported also in the examples in the documentary Posh and Posher, where the elites are seen as dominating the political system in the UK, with the House of Commons and politicians drawn mainly from public school educated white middle class British backgrounds, males, So the idea of the old boys network seems to be more applicable to contemporary UK. So there is a debate over social mobility. The Weberian view suggests that social mobility is limited because of social closure. The new right would criticise the Weberian view for overemphasising social closure. Thinkers like Saunders have emphasised how 80% of those in poverty can move out of poverty over their lifetime. This suggests that the Weberians overplay social closure and ignore the openness and fluidity of society because they assume that people will be able to maintain privileged access to groups from people from the same background. An example of this is an Al Jazeera documentary about a boy from the Lebanon who got a scholarship to Eton and was able to be socially mobile from an asylum seeker background. Okay, so that's part one, and that's lasted 11 minutes. Wow. Okay, well the next one should be quicker. I did more evaluation there within the essay, and it shows you how the essay structure works in terms of how it can compare the views.